Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Lang, and I'm the director of the Being There series. And I'm really excited that you have joined us for Virtually Being There, episode one. And yeah, today what we're going to do is we're going to get to watch one of the stories from Being There, one of the episodes with our wonderful caregiver down there, Pam. And then we're going to have a chance to chat about it as a community. And, I think this is really important to do right now in particular because what I've learned from caregivers is that it's cumulative, right? It's caregiving and raising kids. It's caregiving and going to work and getting groceries and doing all those regular life things that makes it difficult. And I think right now, caregiving and a pandemic is just a whole new layer of challenge that we're all facing. And so if you're having a bit of a rough time right now, this is for you. We're hoping that through our conversation, through the stories that we watch, you'll be able to glean some wisdom that then you'll be able to apply to your own life right now as you try and be a caregiver in the midst of this difficult time. And one of my favorite quotes in the world is a quote by a doctor named Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen. And she says, "Facts bring us to knowledge, but stories lead to wisdom." And I think more than ever, what we need is good stories that we can glean wisdom from about how to live well in the midst of these difficult circumstances. We're just inundated with numbers of infections and deaths and things like that. And that type of knowledge isn't as useful for living well. And that's, I think, what we all want to do is live as well as we can in the midst of this time. And so that's what today is all about. We're going to get going in just a second. We're going to watch Pam's story. But first, we want to introduce who's on the screen here. And as we're doing this, if you wouldn't mind sort of typing in where you're logging in from, that would be really cool. We'd love to hear where everyone is watching this series from. So first of all, let's start with you, Evan. And so we'll get you to say your name, your role on the series, and then let's just start with that.
Yeah, for sure. My name is Evan Teese. I'm a video editor here in Calgary. I've been involved in video production for the last 10 years. And on Being There, I was the editor and post-production supervisor. So that means basically I looked through all the footage, shifted through hours and hours of footage, and basically put it together. So something that might be 10 hours ends up being 10 minutes. So my job is to go through that footage. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, Evan was the one who got to watch all 12 hours of footage we shot for Pam's story. So
and
he
usually
got to know
multiple
well.
times too. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, cool. All right, how about you, Joel?
So my name's Joel Gandry. I was the producer on the series of Being There. And so my role was a combination of lots of different things, organizing conversations and schedules and everything with caregivers like Pam. And coordinating the whole piece of the series. And that involved where Mike needs to be and where our caregivers needed to be, and the post-production side of things too. We shot 13 episodes in total in the series. So there were a lot of different choreographical pieces that had to work. So my job was just kind of to oversee all that and make sure that it all went well. And to make sure that we had good relationships with everyone, because that's something we, especially in documentary filmmaking, it's something that's very important for us to maintain, because these are real people's stories you're telling, and that's very important.
Yeah. Joel, he was the one who made me show up in the right place at the right time, because without him, I don't know if we would have made this, because I would have just been like off in left field somewhere. So I'm really glad that we had Joel telling us where we needed to be. Awesome. Thanks, Joel. So Pam, how about you? Where are you tuning in from right now?
I'm tuning in from my home in Calgary, Alberta.
Mm-hmm. And you, obviously, some people who have seen the series know who you are. You're the caregiver in the story. And we're going to learn a lot more about Pam's story in a second. But Pam, why don't you just share a little bit about sort of the caregiving role that you play?
So I guess a caregiving role as a mother I have two children. My second child was my medically complex child, who you'll see in the video. Mm-hmm. And then also do some caregiving at the Alberta Children's Hospital as a peer mentor. So other families.
Very cool. Yeah. And I can't wait to talk more about that with you. I think let's watch the story, because once we watch the story, we're going to have a lot to talk about. And those of you who have seen any of the Being There series, you'll know that the stories really stimulate a lot of meaningful conversation. And so we're hoping that you guys online can be part of that conversation with us today. And so as you're watching the story, if there's anything that resonates with you, something that stands out to you, feel free to type it in the chat box. And then afterwards, we're going to have a discussion on screen here, and we'll have a chance to answer any of the questions that you have for Pam or any of us that you type into the chat box there. So feel free to engage in this discussion as much as you can in the comment box there on Facebook Live. So with that said, it's time to watch the story. So sit back, relax, enjoy, maybe grab a glass of water and some popcorn. Here we are. We are going to watch Pam's story. Here we go.
In the hospital, the neonatal intensive care unit, or the NICU, or the NICU, is where premature and medically complex newborn babies are cared for. He was diagnosed with numerous neuromuscular conditions, mostly affecting his airway and all 4 of his limbs. Through our journey with Sawyer and knowing that the support that we got through that helped us huge, I've been trained as a volunteer at the Children's Hospital now to support other families who might be just starting their journey with a tracheostomy or are just fresh into their NICU journey. When you find someone that has lived it and does understand from that place, there's just that automatic connection.
Hi, Pam.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me to your place.
Thanks for
I
coming.
really appreciate it. So I've made digital stories with hundreds of patients and their caregivers. And basically, a digital story is a short mini movie that combines your own photos and voice to share an important story from your life. So once we've created this story together, you'll have a chance to share it with some of your friends and family.
Perfect. Oh, that's a good picture.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, because you're feeding him there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that also shows how complex it can be, right?
Yeah, I have him in a sling wearing his feeding pump,
Yeah.
carrying the oxygen bottle with the hip brace.
So now that you've seen it, how do you feel about it?
I don't know, emotional. Seeing how far we had come and where that journey has taken me now.
Hi, I'm Mike.
I'm like, never mind.
Laura, nice to meet you, Laura. Cool. Thanks for coming. So wait, how are you connected here?
I've known these guys for 15 years, I think.
Okay.
Hi guys. Hi, Kelsey. Laura. Nice to meet you.
I'm Jen.
Nice to meet you.
We both work in the NICU.
Oh, excellent. I'm Laura.
Nurses. Yeah. Oh, nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Well, thanks so much for coming. We really appreciate it. It's great to have some people from the Children's Hospital.
Yeah.
Let's do it. All right. Come on over, everybody, and grab a seat. We're going to watch Pam's story. So, you guys ready?
Yes.
You ready? Are you ready, Sawyer? Ready. Yeah, he's ready. All right. Okay, we're ready. Here we go.
I remember the first time that I went to the pumping room. As scary and intimidating as it was sitting down in that room of new moms, it was also comforting. At first, I just listened. But after 2.5 weeks with some of those same people, sharing highs and lows, fears and hopes, we had become a community. The support that I got from those moms is hard to describe, but I knew that it helped me and that it was important. Heath and I would talk to other parents in the hallways or the family lounge. Some days those conversations were about their child's medical struggles. Sometimes they were about normal things like jobs, weather, vacations. But no matter what they were about, there was always that sense of connection. After 112 days in the hospital, we came home. That day was a blur. There was so much to figure out. Sawyer needed oxygen, a feeding tube, a hip brace, and a medication schedule. I understood the medical care Sawyer required, but we had no idea what our lives would look like. Friends and family wanted to help, but we didn't even know what we needed, and we spent the summer at home struggling to figure things out. Just when it felt like we were finally finding our footing, Sawyer's breathing got worse and ended with an ambulance ride to the hospital, a code blue, and a life-saving tracheostomy. It was like a whole new child was born that day, one that needed round-the-clock care. Despite everything that had already happened, we knew that our lives were changing again, and we didn't know how. The 2 years of trach life that followed were intense and challenging, but we learned so much. When the hospital asked me to be trained as a peer mentor for other families, I was nervous about it. But I knew how important it was for me to connect with other parents in those early days. I couldn't let fear stop me from giving other families that same opportunity. Not everyone's story is my story, but I know that the emotions and the daily realities of caring for a medically complex child are the same. It can feel like a lonely, isolating journey, but we are never alone.
There we go.
Well done.
Pam's story, everyone. Yeah. Yeah. Not bad for a first movie.
I just saw Pam as a vulnerable mom coming into the NICU and scared, of course, and just her strength, like every day as she became confident with Sawyer, and then now to give that back to families and to give them the confidence and the strength to be able to do it themselves. It's just like she's come full circle.
When we were in the NICU, that was the stuff that pulls you through the fog, is somebody else saying, and this is what Pam does now, look, I've been there. You know what? I know you're in the dark. I know you're in the fog. I know you can't see the light, but it's there.
I went through something different but the same, my husband and I, with our daughter, and I didn't have a Pam, and we didn't have a NICU. We did everything as an outpatient, and it's watching something like this, you kind of realize, I don't want to say what you missed, because you wouldn't wish an experience like this on anyone, but there was no one guiding the way, and there was no one to ask questions to, and there was no gathering point, you know, and I'm so happy you had that, and that now you can be that for other people.
There is a lot of post-traumatic stress in families that have gone through a NICU experience, and the sort of healing sort of begins almost when you're out of that environment, and or you don't heal, and if you don't have that community, it can be really, really hard.
And sometimes it's not even what you say. Sometimes it's just the fact that you're still there and that you're strong enough to walk into that space and to be there and to be present with someone. Just the fact that they can see you and you survived, and that you have this strength and confidence about you is hope. It gives families that hope.
When you think about caregiving, it's like, you know, cleaning the trach tube, you know, and, you know, like there's all these physical acts of caregiving, but there's something about just sitting there or being there and them knowing that you've walked that before them, right? And that there's something about that in itself that is, I would call caregiving, probably in the best sense of the word, right? Yeah, Pam. Yeah. Good for Pam. Yay!
I never really thought of it as caregiving. It's just, you know, something that we received, and this is a way to like give back.
Awesome. Cool. You know, there's something that I learn every time I watch it. There's something else that stands out to me. And that's what's so cool about a good story, is that no matter where you're at in your life, you view things differently, and you can always take different things from a story. And, you know, one of the things that really stood out to me as I was watching this time, Pam, it's just sort of the incredible resilience that caregivers have to begin with, you know, to make it through the challenges that they face, you know, in your case for over an extended period of time, you know, and it just makes me feel confident that a lot of the caregivers out there who may be having, you know, challenges right now with this whole pandemic thing, I think out of everyone, they're the most capable to make it through this and come out on the other side in a good place because of the resilience that they already have built up through the experiences they've had as a caregiver. So anyways, that was one thing that stood out to me in the story. I really want to know what stood out to you guys, and also everyone online. If you want to type something in the chat box, we'd love to hear what you standing out to you as well. But how about we'll start with you, Evan? You know, as someone who's watched all 12 hours, you know, what did you see in Pam's story when you watched it?
I think what always stands out to me, and it resonates in a lot of the Being There episodes, just the impact that like a 3-minute digital story can have on others, right? Like, because that's usually what your story that you build with the participants ends up being, is around 3 minutes. And just putting that story together and realizing everyone has a story to tell. Some people can really relate to it. Others can think about where they were in their life at that point in time and relate to it. And then it's just very interesting to see the discussion around it. And you realize, you're like, I want to hear someone else's story that's talking about what Pam went through. And you're like, they have a story to tell. And that story could be different every single day. There could be a moment in someone's life. And just very fascinating to me that there's so many different minute little stories to tell. And you could do a 3-minute story about everybody in different places in their life and just the impact that can have. And you're like, someone else went through what I went through. Mm-hmm. And just for me personally, watching Pam's story, it's very interesting to be like, where was I in life at that point? And what was I going through? And seeing like, wow, that struggle, it's just amazing to see that to me.
Yeah. I mean, Pam, your friend, and I've forgotten her name. What was your friend's name?
Yeah, my friend Laura.
I mean, I wanted to hear Laura's digital story.
Yeah, absolutely,
when that's what I was thinking, you know, same thing as Evan. I was like, wow, I want to know her story as a caregiver, you know, and the way that she didn't have those things that you had or that you're providing to others, right? I mean, it was a really compelling part of that discussion was her sharing very vulnerably about how she was experiencing her caregiving role, right? So yeah, great comment, Evan. Joel, how about you? You know, is there something that stood out to you, resonated with you in the story?
Yeah, I think what resonated with me and always continues to is the fact that we talk about, and it's kind of why we titled the series as such, Being There. That someone in the comments specifically addresses that. Like, sometimes it's not necessarily what we say or what we do, but just the fact that we're there and that we can be there. And I think what struck me the most about it this time, Pam, is that in this situation that's going on right now in the world, being there is a harder thing than it used to be. Like it's changed from what it used to be physically there. It's so much more complicated. So that really stood out to me this time.
Yeah. You view it through this whole lens of social distancing, right? And being there for someone is going to look very different in this point in time, you know, than it would have, you know, in the moment where we're all squished into a living room talking about a story, right? Yeah, it's a great comment, Joel. Yeah, so Pam, I know, you know, it's been about a year now, I think, or maybe a bit longer since we did it. What was it for you to watch the story, or what was it like for you to watch the story right now? And did you see anything in it different that you maybe wouldn't have seen the first time you created it?
I think what really stands up for me, and similar to Joel, is through this pandemic time, I've been really taken back to our time with Sawyer and his medically complex challenges that we faced, and our time in the NICU, and how similar the times actually have been. You know, through the pandemic, we haven't had a lot of control over what we're able to do and not able to do. And it's the same in the NICU. I mean, none of us chose this time in the pandemic, and we didn't choose to be in the NICU with Sawyer. So I think that's kind of really what has been resonating with me a lot when as I've journeyed through these days and that time, is just how similar it is. The isolation, the uncertainty of the situation.
Wow, it's incredible the parallels that you can draw, you know, between sort of something that happened, you know, in a very acute setting years ago in a hospital and this sort of whole experience that we're all facing right now, you know, like that's amazing to think of it that way, right? And thanks for sharing that. So Joel, before we go on, I want to ask Pam a lot more questions. I got more questions for you, Pam, so be ready. But Joel, is there anything from the chat? Is there any questions?
Yeah, Allison posed a question, and she said, I would love to know from Pam how, since this story's creation, she has seen her role as a caregiver evolve and change, having seen herself in a new light. I'm curious how that resonates with you, Pam.
Yeah, great question.
It actually has been really empowering, I think, to see myself through the digital story and myself as a caregiver in that role. I think anytime we can share our story or have a little piece or perspective pulled out of our story, it can be really empowering. And just to recognize or to see the work that I've done in that way, it's been really cool.
Yeah, that is cool, right? We often don't think about our life like a story. And then when we see it up on the screen, it takes on a totally different feel. Sometimes.
And I think you say it perfect in the episode too, Mike, where a lot of the times we just think of caregiving as like, you know, a physical task that we're doing. And even maybe in our everyday lives as like parents, or in mine as a mom, just like folding the clothes or, you know, the medical stuff, but it can be being there. Caregiving can be sitting beside someone and listening, or, you know, reaching out to a friend. And so that has been a really interesting and just a really neat opportunity that I've been able to pull from that experience.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, that sort of brings me to one of my next questions for you is, you know, in your role as a peer mentor, you know, you are doing that, being there with them, right? Like you're sitting next to them and sort of being present with these families as they face these very difficult challenges with their kids. So I guess I'm sort of wondering, you know, how do you think we can be there for people right now? And obviously it's going to look different, just like Joel said. So based on your experiences as a peer mentor, as a caregiver, how do you think we could sort of be there for people in this strange time we're in?
Yeah. I think, honestly, I think a lot of it right now is about validating people's experiences. And I think more so now than ever before, at least in my experience, is like we can kind of really understand walking in someone else's shoes. You know, the corporate people are being forced into homes and being forced into maybe parent roles, or, you know, we're all of our lives are shifting in some way, I feel. And so we can really understand. So being able to validate someone's experience, or being able to sit there and listen and really like gain an understanding. I think there's a lot of uncertainty for maybe all of us through this time. So
I love that. You know, there's ways to validate the things that people are going through, because, you know, you see sort of on social media, a lot of memes going around, you know, and sometimes that's really, you know, people sort of read those and they're like, well, I'm not like learning 5 languages and cleaning up my basement. You know, I'm barely making it through the day with my kids. Right. And so I think that's important. I think really important for us to think about how can we validate the challenges people are facing instead of trying to force them into a direction of, you know, you got to turn this into the best possible experience of your life, you know? And I think sometimes we feel that pressure from the memes that we see going around, or for other people. And I love your comment about just being there for someone to validate the challenges they're facing. Maybe that's what they really need right now. I love it. Great comment. And Joel, I see there's another question here that we'll pass on to Pam.
Yeah, it's sort of a follow-up question from Allison. Part 2 of that question, which I guess pertains a little to what your work is now, Pam, and I'm curious about this as well. Allison says that part 2 of that question is how sharing your story has opened doors for you as far as your journey as a medical mama, she says.
Oh, medical mama. All right.
Medical mama, it has opened like a lot of just being able to share my story in different ways, like at conferences, and really like impacting, I think, the way that medical care is delivered, where we're seeing a lot more of, like as Mike said, even at the beginning, like the stories provide the wisdom and the stories make the data compelling. And so by sharing my story and having this, it's changed my role even just to being more of a storyteller at conferences, or being able to leverage this and help people understand what caregivers go through, or what people need and where they need to be met. So
so how have you shared this? I'm really interested to how have you shared your episode in the different ways that you've been speaking at conferences and things like that, but what does that look like?
I've shared it at conferences, a couple conferences here, and it's just the power of meeting people where they're at, the power of that, like, you know, we say in the episode, like, the emotions and the daily realities are still the same, no matter what your story looks like. So, and having someone that has walked the road before you and can help support you along the way just helps you to feel validated, helps you to know that someone is on the other side of it.
Yeah.
And, right. I think even through the pandemic, maybe we're getting hope from seeing other countries, starting to open up, or seeing them, come out on the other side. And so providing that hope through peer mentorship. So
yeah, that's so cool. I mean, what I really appreciate about your story, Pam, is the way that, not only did you sort of go through something very difficult, but you learned so much from it, and you decided to actually use that to help others, right? As a peer mentor. And now even beyond that, right? As an advocate for people creating the peer mentor roles in hospitals, at conferences and things like that. It's really, it's inspiring to me to think about the challenges that I've faced in my own life, and how those could maybe push me forward in my own story. And in the way that yours pushed you forward in your story as a peer mentor and a caregiver for others, for many more people now, even through the episode, right? There's been many caregivers who you've been able to touch by sharing your story in that way. So I have another question here, because in your story itself, I want to talk a little bit more about caregiving specifically, because in your episode, you talked about how you sort of took you sort of like a few months when you initially got home from the hospital, and you said you didn't even know what you needed. And then eventually it sounded like you did sort of come to that understanding of what you needed as a caregiver to do your role well. And so I guess, what was that process like? How did you go from not even knowing what you needed to having this very clear picture of how you could care for Sawyer and how people could support you as a caregiver for Sawyer?
I think, honestly, a big piece was having the support of parents with, that have lived the trach life before us, being able to lean on them. And I think also just taking it day by day, sometimes it was moment by moment, just with really beginning to understand what we needed as a family. And I think another huge piece for us was being able to ask, being able to ask other people, being able to ask each other to figure out what we needed, being able to ask our friends, like, can you come over and vacuum for me? And so, I think a huge piece though, and why I am a peer mentor, is because I learned so much about what I needed, even through other people. And
I guess all those moms and those families you met in the NICU, right? Just those hallway conversations that you guys had about life and about work and about sort of the illnesses your childs were facing. I mean, it's incredible how much we can gain from those types of interactions. And I think that's why something like Stories for Caregivers really matters, because we can learn what we need through watching the stories of other caregivers, right? And I think that's you beautifully sort of represented that in your own digital story of, I love that. And I love that sign, I make milk, what's your superpower? That's one of my favorites. But, even in that room with the other moms, right? You guys are sharing stories and you're gleaning wisdom that you can then use when you go home and have to live the trach life, #trach life or whatever. So, I mean, that's amazing. Joel, was there another question?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's hear it.
Question. The question is, for Pam, as a caregiver, do you have any tips for how to make time for practicing self-care? And I think that's a really valuable piece. I think as a caregiver, there's so much time and energy spent on someone else. And how do you make time to practice at least some caregiving for yourself?
Yeah, I find that's probably one of the biggest challenges as being a caregiver and a mom. But one of the things, I try to really do and did back then was to find something that for me filled me up and I was really intentional about it. And I think sometimes we have this idea that self-care has to be like, I leave the house and I have time on myself. But, self-care for me some days was maybe I had a 5-minute shower and I was really intentional about that being my self-care for the day. Or I, woke up 5 minutes earlier and I wrote down some journaling. And some days maybe it's just taking like 3 breaths. So I think like 3 really intentional breaths where I could be in it. So for me, self-care has always been finding something that kind of brings me back home to myself. And it doesn't have to be a day at the spa. It can be something very, very little, but I still pull that time for me. And sometimes it's about saying no to my kids so that I can have time to myself. So
yeah. Cool. That's awesome, Pam. I mean, that topic of self-care is something caregivers need to be talking about more. And it's awesome that you get to do that with all those families, right?
Yeah.
As a peer mentor. Yeah.
Well, and I think too, it's challenging as a caregiver, but knowing that you're worth the time to take care of yourself is too. I think for me, I pushed myself second because Sawyer's medical needs and all of that was always the priority. And so it was too about learning how to make myself the priority, even if it was for 5 minutes a day. So
that's awesome. Cool, Pam. Wow. This is great stuff. I really appreciate you doing this and sharing your story, because you've got so much wisdom now, having been a peer mentor and hearing so many stories of families in the NICU. So that's awesome. So we're going to wrap up in just a minute here, but I want to make sure that we get back to Evan Thies, because he saw so much footage that didn't actually make it into the episode. And so I was wondering, Evan, when we're sitting in the editing suite, me and you and Joel together, we're just like agonizing over these decisions about what we cut, what we don't cut. And there's so much like additional knowledge and wisdom that we can't include. So I'm just wondering, what's something that maybe you saw in the footage that maybe the people didn't get to see in Pam's episode itself?
Well, I popped back in the edit this morning because I had been in that edit probably over a year or so, just looking through some of the footage we didn't use. And a lot that stood out to me was just a lot of the nice family moments that Pam was having with her and her husband Keith and their kids, and just there was like puppet shows and lightsaber battles. So it made me think of the phrase "this too shall pass," because in those kind of challenging, kind of harder moments, you realize that does pass, and there is some of these kind of ordinary moments that turn extraordinary. So you look at this footage, and most of that won't make it in because it's not telling the story that we're necessarily telling at this moment, but it tells the story of their moment in time now and where they are in the happy family. It's and I think with all these difficult COVID times, it's a good statement to have this too shall pass, because right now we're in some of these difficult challenges, but there will be times again. And even some of the stuff I see right now on social media, it's all the families doing, little dance offs or some fun moments as a family. Yeah. And so that's kind of the stuff that the audience doesn't get to see, that I get to see all this stuff and sift through it. Little bits of making the episode. I'm like, that's some really great gems that you could have a nice little piece there, but they just aren't going to make it in. Right?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we included the dance party in the living room. I felt terrible we had to take rid of the lightsaber battle, because that was awesome, and the puppet show was also amazing. But yeah, it's sort of fun, these little moments that are captured sort of in the footage that doesn't always make it in. It teaches us, me and Evan and Joel, Pam, as we're sitting in the video suite, we're learning so much about caregiving and just about your family and sort of what matters to you. It's very cool to get to do that together. And I think, we feel really privileged, to get to be telling these stories because of how much we learn in the editing suite together. So thanks, Evan, for sharing that one. That's a really great little gem, that everyone now gets to know a little bit about because of we're doing this live screening, right? So great. Well, it looks like we've gone for about 30 minutes, and I mean, I could just keep going. I could talk about this stuff all day, but I wanted to sort of give everyone a chance to say one sort of final comment to sort of wrap things up, and then we'll end for today. But we will be coming back in a week with a new episode. So, Joel, how about we'll start with you? What's one comment you would maybe want to leave with everyone out there who's been tuning in with us today?
Well, I think I'll sort of tie this into a question that just came up, which is who cares for a caregiver? The question was, who cares for you, Pam? And I think that's a good question for us all to take forth. Is at some points in our lives, we're all caregiving. And at those points, do we have someone else who can also care for us? Because I think those are really important, especially now, to figure out who in our lives are we caring for, and who in our lives can also care for us as we go through that.
Yeah, it's a great comment. Yeah. Yeah, that's a question that is Pam going to answer that question? Who cares for you, Pam?
Yeah, that's a hard question. It is. I'll say like I maybe was lucky or whatever word you want to use there, but to have kind of like a supportive husband and to have family around, and even to, hire people to come in and care for Sawyer. And I know that's not always, it's not always as easy as that for a lot of people. But I think as a caregiver, just finding maybe that person or that support group or some person that you can at least reach out to, and ask for help or ask for what you need, or even have some sort of conversation with them. And I think, honestly, that is a huge piece of peer mentorship. As a peer mentor, people can reach out to me, and that is part of my role. And so having these programs available to caregivers is a huge, is a really big opportunity for them to be cared for in that way.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's beautiful the way you said that. I mean, and really we were hoping that this series would be also caring for caregivers, right? In that way, right? By getting to connect with someone like Pam and learn from their story, as an act of caregiving for all the people out there who maybe don't have someone to pick up the phone and chat to right away. And I mean, I think I agree with you, Pam. Programs and services to make sure that that's available to everyone is going to be really important, I think, in the future, for caregivers to really be able to live well in the midst of the challenges that they're facing. So yeah, Evan, how about you? One final comment to sort of end us off here.
Sure. Yeah. I think a lot of like the title of the series, Being There, especially in these more challenging times, what that means for both caregivers and each other. We kind of are a little bit like caregivers for each other right now. So it's sometimes just sending a text or checking in or a little FaceTime, because there is caregivers in our lives and everyone in our lives going through a difficult time. So it's just a little bit of taking that time to be there for someone, which is a little more difficult at a distance. So what does that look like? Nobody exactly knows, but just taking a bit of time to check in with people that are important in your life and caregivers in your life that might be going through an even more challenging time.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really important. And that leads great to my final comment. One of the things I took away was that gathering point that your friend talked about and that you experienced, in the pumping room, in the NICU. There was a gathering place for people to come together and have meaningful conversations. And I'm hoping that's what these weekly virtually being there sessions will become, right? An opportunity for caregivers around the country to come together and have some conversations. It's a gathering point for us to talk about how we're feeling and what we're going through right now in the midst of COVID with this lens of caregiving. And so thank you all for tuning in. For everyone who's here, we really appreciate you being here, being part of the discussion. Thanks for all those who left comments and made questions. And if this was valuable for you, please come back. We're going to be doing this every Thursday in the month of May at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. So feel free to show up here, watch a story with us, be part of the conversation. We want this to be a gathering place where we can support each other as we go through this sort of pandemic moment that we're all living in. So thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next week. Joel, Evan, Pam, thank you so much for being here. Thanks, and let's continue the story next week. See you later.
Thank you guys so much.
Bye.